One, two.
Hey everybody, and welcome to the channel. And tonight I'm going to talk about the recording of Message to Attila, which was released on Enja Records in 2015. It's a tribute record to Attila Zoller, the Hungarian jazz guitarist, and it features a wide variety of really great musicians that I was very fortunate enough to work together with, and I wanted to give you a background on how this came together. As it is in life, a lot of times things happen, you meet people or situations come to pass that are unexpected, and one of those was in the mid-90s while I was living in Germany. I was performing at the Musikmesse, and that's in Frankfurt, and I was playing at, I believe it was the Hohner booth, and playing jazz guitar or whatever, and there was an older guy looking at me, and I didn't recognize him, and then I realized that it was Attila Zoller. And I had never met Attila, but I knew his reputation, and it was a great honor to meet him, and we ended up playing for a couple of hours and exchanged telephone numbers, and at that time fax numbers, and he invited me to his school in Vermont, which unfortunately I wasn't able to go to because my schedule didn't allow me to get over there, and we had stayed in touch and tried to put something together, and then sadly not too long after that he got sick and passed away. So that was my one opportunity to actually play with Attila, but it left a big mark on me, and I always remembered that. Years later, I met a gentleman in Cologne who became a student of mine. He's a journalist and also a jazz guitar player. And he had a guitar sitting in his apartment, which was this Hofner guitar, which looked familiar, but I didn't know where to place it. And he said, "Do you know whose guitar that is?" And I said, "No, I don't know." And he said, "It's Attila Zoller's." And I'm like, "Wow." And he said that was his last guitar. And where he got it from was that his girlfriend, it's a long story, but she was close friends with Attila's daughter, Alicia. And Alicia lives in Vermont. She doesn't have anything to do with the school anymore, but she's close to the people that run it. And she's good friends with my student's girlfriend. But it was her mother, Inge, that was actually very good friends with Attila. Inge is a very special lady. She is a writer, and she lives in Cologne, and she was very close to Attila. They were just friends, but she used to hang with him and Zoot Sims and all these different musicians in Europe in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, and go to places like Paris to see them play. And Attila would stay at her apartment. So I had a chance to spend time with Inge as well and get some stories about Attila. Of course, everybody knows the song The Birds and the Bees. It was recorded by Pat Metheny and Jim Hall, and it's probably Attila's most famous piece of music, although I'd say there are much stronger pieces of music compositionally, but it's a great, great tune. And the original version, if you don't know it, on Gypsy Cry, I highly recommend. It's a very groovy tune. In fact, he wrote that at Inge's apartment. And Inge told me that like 2 o'clock in the morning he came running to her and said, "I wrote my hit, I wrote my hit." And so if you hear the tune, you know that. The way the project was introduced to me was that my former student sent me a message in early 2012 and said that he had just been to Vermont and saw Alicia, and Alicia asked, "Is there any way to get musicians together who my father played with to play his music as a tribute?" And my student thought, "Well, I know a guy who could probably produce that." And he thought of me, which I thought was a great compliment. And when he wrote this to me, I was like, wow, because I never thought that there would be any other connection to Attila after that meeting and playing with him that time in the mid-90s. And I said, sure, I would love to do that. I don't know where to start, but let me think about it, and I'll make some calls and send some emails out to the guys I know who had played with Attila. And my first list of guys to call were, of course, Pat Metheny, who was a student of Attila's. And he met Attila back in, I believe it was, maybe he was around 13 or 14, in a jazz camp from Downbeat in Chicago. And I know that Sheila Jordan was on that camp with Attila. And Attila recognized Pat's talent and said, "Hey man, you should come to New York and visit me, and I guess Pat did. His parents drove him to New York, and they hung out for a week, and he got to see Jim Hall and Ron Carter play duets all week at some, I don't know if it was Sweet Basil's or some club, I'd have to ask Pat, and hung with Attila and took lessons. So that was the only formal teacher that Pat Metheny really had. And the only other person that I would put up there for kind of a formal teacher would be Joe DiOrio, because I know he spent a lot of time with Joe in Miami. But of course, I knew that Pat had a lot of affinity towards Attila. He was very grateful for the time that he spent. So I sent him an email. I sent an email to John Schofield and John Abercrombie, and that was it on my end to get started. And then I got a copy of Alicia's phone book, which was Attila's, which had a list of guys that some I knew and some I didn't. And of course, at the top of the list was Ron Carter. And I had never met Ron Carter, of course, huge fan, and called him up. And I just said, "Hey, Ron Carter, this is David Becker. You don't know me, but doing this project for Attila, and would you be interested in being involved?" And literally, I think within an hour, my cell phone rang. I happened to be in LA at the time, and I look at the phone number, and it's a New York number. And so I pick up the phone. I said, "Hello," and he said, "Mr. Becker?" And I said, "Yes," and he said, "Ron Carter." And that was like, wow. So we talked, and he said, "Absolutely, I'll be there in a heartbeat." So I said, "Listen, I don't know when we're going to start the recording process. I'm shooting for sometime in the summer. I'll let you know." And I told him I had 3 tunes I'd like him to do. So I took out 3 specific pieces of Attila's from his catalog. The first one was a tune called "A Thousand Dreams," which is based on the chord progression of "There'll Never Be Another You," which is interesting because there's another tune on the album that's based on that as well, but that's another story. And a very beautiful ballad called "Peace Tune" that I knew right away would be great for Ron to multi-track 4 basses. Then I had Gene and Ron do "When It's Time," which is beautiful. So those were the 3 tunes that I chose for Ron to do. And I wrote arrangements, of course, for the ballad, writing 4 different parts for the bass. And I was in Europe at that time, so I was kind of going back and forth, and I would send Ron the updated versions of the tunes, and he would send me back emails and said, "Got it, I'm in the woodshed working on it." So we had a good relationship going back and forth from the very get-go. And then we set up the recording session, and I contacted Gene, of course, and Gene was late to the project. I had met Gene before through Joe DiOrio, and Gene actually called me. I was having dinner, and he said, "I heard about your project for Attila. I'd love to be there. I don't care if you can pay me any money. I want to do this." And I thought, well, sure. I mean, we had a budget, so obviously I was going to pay the musicians something. And I thought, what a great way to have a quartet. So it would be Ron, myself, Gene, and I got my brother Bruce to play drums. So we had a quartet for that first tune that I mentioned. And then for the peace tune, I thought, okay, drums would be nice, brushes, and Ron. And then I later added some acoustic guitar to that. The last thing that I had anybody do in the studio, which still gives me chills when I hear it, is I asked Ron. He was still in the bass booth, and I said, "Hey Ron, could you just speak in the microphone and say a message to Attila?" Because my idea was to call the record "Message to Attila," that all the musicians would speak a message to Attila other than just playing the music. And of course I thought he'd say, "Hey Attila, it's Ron," or whatever. But all of a sudden he played this bass figure, and everybody in the booth kind of talking, all of a sudden everybody just shut up, and it was great. And he does this kind of beatnik rap thing, which you have to hear. So it starts off the record, and I'm so proud of that I got a chance to do that. We had a great session that day. Ron was just really great, and Gene, of course. I can't say enough about Ron Carter. I mean, he was so giving, and it was a great pleasure to work with him and play with him, and we developed a friendship through that, which we still occasionally email with each other, and that's always a great compliment to me, that not only did we work together, but that we remain in contact. So I got those things done, and you know, I didn't have a huge budget because it was being financed by my student. So I thought, well, the next sessions, what am I going to do? Now, I talked to Mike Stern in between that time, and I'd actually talked to Jimmy Heath just prior to that recording session. I was trying to get Jimmy on the session, but because logistically Ron was available on certain days, it was hard to fit Jimmy in, and I wish I had in hindsight, and sadly he passed away. But there was a long list of guys that I wish I had been able to get. Dave Holland is one of them. But, you know, we got a good group of guys. So I had spoken to Mike and arranged to do a recording session with Mike, but that was postponed. I arranged the next session, which would have been a couple of months later in the midsummer of 2012, with John Abercrombie and Michael Formanek. Michael is a great bassist if you don't know him, and Michael worked with Attila a lot, and he at the time was living, I think, in DC or somewhere near there. So we arranged Michael to come up to New York, and John, of course, came out, and we did it at the same studio that we had done the sessions with Ron at. And for that session, I had Bruce again on drums, but I decided to be the producer because it wasn't my intention to play on all the tracks. I just wanted to arrange and produce the record, and if I could play, great, but if I felt that it wasn't necessary to do that, I just sat out. So the waltz that I picked out for John Abercrombie, which John was a master playing waltzes, was a tune called Waltz for Joy, which I thought would sound great as a trio. There was no need for me to play because John, first of all, was a master at playing in trio, and I thought he and Bruce and Michael would make a great trio, so that's what they did. In the end, though, there was a missing chord on the outro. If you listen to that record and you listen to the fade of Waltz for Joy, you'll hear a chord. I think it's an E major 7 sharp 11. And I actually played that because when we were mixing the record, which I'll talk about in a minute, there was this space where John was kind of soloing, and I said it really needs just this little support harmonically. So I grabbed a guitar and I put down that chord. So that's my contributions to that tune. And then at the same session, I picked a really great tune called Samba Caribbea, which is a beautiful samba tune that Attila wrote. And I arranged the chord structure, the accompaniment, based on what Attila had done. I have it written out, so if anybody wants to get a copy of it, I believe I still have the lead sheet for it, where I wrote the parts out. And we had planned to do that as a quartet with Michael, myself, Bruce, and Peter Bernstein. But unfortunately, Peter couldn't make that session. So I said, listen, we'll go ahead and record the guitar, my guitar parts, bass, and drums, and then I can come back to New York at a later date, and you can, you know, lay down the melody and a solo. And that's what we did. And then the next session that we did was with Mike Stern, and that session was done in LA. Mike was out playing, I think, a week at Catalina's. So, and I've known Mike for years, and of course I spoke to him on the phone. He said, absolutely, I'll be there. And so we worked it out, and that would have been, I think, the end of 2012, because the DBT just finished recording Distance Traveled, and Mike was out. So we did the recording at a studio in LA, owned by a friend of mine, Rich Eames, great piano player, and Rich actually plays keyboards on electric piano on that recording. Bruce on drums. I had Robbie Knipster play electric bass, and again, I just produced because I didn't feel it necessary to play. You know, I just wanted to be there and be the support for that project, and it's a really cool version. It's the second tune on the record. Now this is the tune that's also based on There'll Never Be Another You. Attila had a tendency to do that, but the tune is called No Xantipa. And I had to figure out what the heck a Xantipa is, but a Xantipa is a shrew. So he played with words. Instead of There'll Never Be Another You, There'll Never Be Another Shrew. And somehow that became the title. So that's Attila's sense of humor. Well, the recording with Mike went great, and we did a couple of takes, and Mike said he wanted to do as many takes as it took. And we probably did, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 takes, and he had a blast. And that was that. And then I had some musicians that, like Pat Metheny, who actually sent me an email. I was in Argentina, and I remember getting this email from Pat. He said, "Hey David, I got your message. Sorry it took so long to reply." He said, "I'd love to be involved." And he said, "I have an idea. What do you think of this?" He said, Jim Hall, recorded The Birds and the Bees a while back. And I believe at the time it was done for a record of Jim's, which the record company went defunct, so it was out of print. But he said, "I think I can get the rights to that recording and give it to you for the album. How would that be?" And I said, "That would be great, man. If you could do that, that'd be wonderful." Because Pat's got a busy schedule, and I knew it'd be hard to pin him down to actually record something. So I thought, you know, why not? I mean, everybody knows that tune, and Pat's done it live. And so it took us probably a couple of months, you know, a couple of emails back and forth, and then I finally got another email from Pat and also from his manager, David Scholemson. And I called up David, who I know, and David said, "What do you need again?" And I said, "Well, you know, Pat said he could get the rights to this tune." He said, "Oh, no problem." Sent it over, and that was that. So we got that on the record, which I thought would be great. The only thing I did to that is I remastered it, because it was originally a live recording, but I kept the applause out at the end, and I did a little bit of tweaking in the studio, which I won't say what I did specifically, but if you listen to the two versions, you'll hear a little bit of a difference. And then there are some other musicians who were able to be involved. I asked Eugene Newman, who is a great piano player that actually runs or helps run Attila's school in Vermont, and he did a great duet with Dre Hobbs, who's another guitar player that I believe teaches there and also had played with Attila quite a bit. They did a real beautiful ballad called "Meant to Be." So that added to the project, because I thought it'd be great to have some of the people that, you know, Attila worked with at the school be involved in this as well. Another addition to the recording project was a great vibist from Germany, Wolfgang Lockerschmidt, who I had the pleasure of playing with Larry Coryell. We did a trio date together in Frankfurt some years ago, probably around the same time that I met Attila, or just prior to that, I think it was, or maybe just a little bit after. And we got to know each other, and you know, Wolfgang, of course, played with Attila quite a bit, because Attila worked a great deal in Europe. And so he put together a tune that was a really cool tune. It's called Truffle Peter, that's how you'd say it in German. And he did it with a guitar player, Helmut Krager, who was another great guitar player from Germany that Attila spent some time with. I was grateful that those guys put that track together. And then we had another track that Wolfgang put together for the recording, which was with a clarinetist, Lajos Dudas, who lives in Germany and but had played with Attila. So it's nice to have a landsman from Hungary on the recording. And the tune that they did, homage to OP, which would have been homage to Oscar Petterford. So that's a very nice tune as well. And that's got a rhythm section on it as well. It's a very swinging version. I'd have to look at the credits. I think it's number 9 on the CD. And then there was a ballad that Attila had written for his daughter Alicia called Alicia's Lullaby. And if I had to pick a tune that I wanted to do myself, that was the one. So I ended up doing that as a duo with a really great cellist that I know who has performed with us, the DBT, and also on Batavia, and that's Anya LaPerry. And I just heard cello and acoustic guitar. So we recorded that in Los Angeles, I believe in Burbank. And in the beginning of the tune, I simulated a little music box, which is actually me playing behind the bridge, and then some harmonics and things like that. And the wind-up we found, I think it was some kind of sample, but it was very nice if we could do that. So, and Alicia was very pleased with that, because it was important for me that, you know, she liked what we did, because we're playing her dad's music. And then, of course, at the end of the recording, there's 4 messages, one from Mike, one from Michael Formanak, one from John Abercrombie, and one from Peter Bernstein. So those were just additional messages that they're speaking to Attila, because I wanted everybody to do that, or at least as much as I could get those guys to do that. But the cream of the crop is obviously Ron Carter. That's, you know, that's a track that I'm so proud that I got to produce and witness. And I have to say that, you know, I didn't know Attila that well. You know, we only spent a day together playing music, and I had hoped that we would do more, but unfortunately because he passed away, that wasn't to be. But I felt like I got to know him in great detail through the music. And I always felt his presence during the recording sessions, which I think is important. When you're doing something, you know, I write a lot of music, and I've written a lot of music over the years that, you know, is very personal, so I know it from the inside out. But when I'm working with other people's music, you never meet the composer. I mean, sometimes you do, but most of the time you're working on pieces of stuff that's, you know, been around for a long time. And I met Attila. I got to know him a little bit, but getting to know his music from the inside gave me a deeper appreciation for who he was, not only as a musician but as a person. And I saw a lot of parallels to his musical path of how he looked at things, how he looked at chords and melodies, and how I do. And there was a lot of intersection from things that I find true in music to what he was doing. So it was very easy for me to work with this music. I mixed Message to Attila at River Rock Studios in Minneapolis. It's a place that I've worked at a lot. Sadly, I'm not sure if the record is that available now digitally. I know there are still copies available. Unfortunately, Enja did a really crappy job, if I might say, of promoting it. I've known Matthias Winkelmann for a long time, and he knew Attila, and they were great friends. But I just have to say, you know, from the business standpoint, I'm going to be honest, he dropped the ball on this one. And it's unfortunate because it really is a great project. If you can get a copy of it, I highly recommend it. I'm putting things up on YouTube as well of the recording session. I think I have a few of the tunes up there. I will put more. But I just wanted to give you a background on how this came together. I'm very proud of the work that we did, and I'm grateful to the musicians who participated, and I think it does justice to the legacy of Attila Zoller. If you don't know him, don't know his playing, check him out. I mean, there's a lot of YouTube footage of him with Jim Hall in Germany in the 70s. With Red Mitchell, there's stuff with him and Wolfgang. The list is a who's who of jazz that worked with Attila Zoller. And he was a very humble guy. He escaped Hungary at the time of communism. He literally left his hometown of Visegrad with his guitar and a little bag of clothing. And I went to his house in Visegrad. I played the Attila Zoller festival, which was a great honor. Visegrad is a very tiny town northwest of Budapest, and it's right on the Danube, on the Donau. And he literally, when he left, he walked over these hills and wound up in Austria to flee. That itself is an amazing story. And then, of course, he became a great success by doing so in Austria, later Germany, and then, of course, worldwide. He's sadly missed by so many musicians who loved him. And there are so many other guys I wish I was able to get. Kenny Burrell, because he wrote a tune, Blues for KB. And just the list is, Gary Peacock was another guy. And one of the guys that I'm sorry that we didn't get was Lee Konitz. Lee was living in Poland at the time, and we did speak indirectly. I met Lee many, many years ago through Freddie Gruber, but for this project I didn't have direct contact. And he was into doing it, but it just didn't come to pass because at the point that I got enough tunes to release a record, Lee wasn't available to do the recording, and it was just logistically a little difficult. So that's, in hindsight, you know, had I the opportunity, again, Lee passed on, so, but I'm happy with what we got. So I hope you check it out. I hope you enjoy these videos that I'm making because I want to share a lot of the experiences that I've had in my musical life, projects, recording sessions, you know, tours, concerts, just interactions with musicians, to give you a perspective of what I've been afforded to do in my life. And I don't take anything for granted, and the Message to Attila project is one of those highlights in my musical life. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing. If you haven't already, just check the box, check the like, and I've got more coming up. Take care.